Hey everyone, it's Raf. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am very excited to be giving you my top 6 historical fiction book recommendations. Recently, a few friends of mine have been asking for fiction book recommendations, and all of the books I've recommended have been either historical fiction or fantasy books, and I do think that historical fiction is my favourite genre and a really good genre to transition into reading fiction if you're a non-fiction reader like a lot of my friends were, or if you're trying to transition into reading in the first place. It is very transportive as a genre, which I think is better than contemporary fiction, because a lot of people don't like the idea of just reading about real life that they experience every day. And so I hope you find this stack of recommendations useful. If you have any historical fiction recommendations, please leave them down below and let us get straight into it. The first book I want to recommend is one of my all-time favourite books, and that is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This is a historical saga following the story of Sunja's family over the course of 100 years as they moved from Korea to Japan in the 1900s. What I admire about this book is how it is so vast in exploring the social and the political dynamic between the Koreans and the Japanese at a point in time when the Japanese were trying to colonize Korea and other Asian countries, but at the same time it is so intimate and emotive in exploring really specific human experiences that we might not resonate specifically with, but which opens our eyes anyway. I went to see the author Min Jin Lee speak at the Sydney Writers' Festival a few years ago, and listening to her process of writing and also her motivations behind writing this book specifically made me fall in love with it even more. The first thing she said that stuck with me was the fact that she loves to observe and listen to other people to see how other people behave and what their motivations are. And I think I can really see that kind of personal practice of the author transfer to the characters that she writes, because like I said, every character goes through a really specific emotional experience, and the way she explores it really opens your eyes to what people have to deal with, even if we don't have to deal with it ourselves. Another thing that she mentioned was the fact that this entire book ends up becoming one giant metaphor for the game that is life. Min Jin Lee is American Korean herself, who did live in Japan at one point, and she was saying how the game of Pachinko is a traditional Korean game and everyone that plays it knows that the game is rigged and that you can't win it. However, everyone plays it anyway, and she says that ends up representing life for Koreans, life for women, and life for everyone in general. I think hearing her say that gave me a new lens to view this book with, and it added so much depth. I really love this book and everything it represents. The author's writing as well is so lyrical and transportive. I opened up the book and I fell into it. Her description of the Korean slums and the fish markets and the stands where they make kimchi for hours on end really made me feel like I was there in the moment with the characters. I haven't read another book like this, and I cannot wait to see what other books Min Jin Lee comes out with in the future. I highly recommend you pick up this book and give it a read, and please let me know what you think if you have read it already. This is a brilliant book. I could not recommend it enough. My next historical fiction book recommendation is a little bit of a lighter book. It is another favourite. That is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Shaffer and Annie Barrows. This book follows the story of a war journalist, Juliet Ashton, in 1946. One day she receives a very strange message in a book delivered to her door from the Guernsey Channel Islands that causes her to drop everything and move there. When she gets there, she meets the most incredible, unique, quirky cast of characters who are all part of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. This book is actually narrated in a set or series of letters from all of the characters who live on the Guernsey Channel Islands. It gives us a really intimate insight into the experiences of people who are struggling with the war, with betrayal, with loss, with love. And it is also so hopeful and light-hearted. I think for me, one of the strongest messages of this book was the power of good people and good literature to bring everyone together, even in the most dire or gloomy of situations, which is a really hopeful message, especially in the middle of a pandemic. So if you're looking for a bit of a lighter historical fiction book that will be easier to read, I would definitely recommend this. The next book on my recommendations list is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This book follows the story of Agnes, who is the last person to be put on death row in Iceland, and we follow her story unfold against a really stark backdrop. Fun fact, the author Hannah Kent, who is actually Australian, moved to Iceland and lived in a little Icelandic cabin while she was writing this book because she wanted her writing to emulate the landscape she was writing about, and you can really see that in her writing. It is very descriptive, very lyrical, and extremely transportive. So over the course of this book, we follow the woman's final days before execution unfold, and we are also slowly drawn into her past as we watch her brutal murder of her former master. Hannah Kent writes an extremely emotive and haunting landscape. I was at the edge of my seat, especially when we got into the thick of the plot, and so I would highly recommend this if you want to be transported into a very vast, shocking existence that we could not even imagine ourselves. My next recommendation is a little bit different, and that's because it is a mythological historical fiction. That is Circe by Madeline Miller. First of all, this cover is stunning, and second of all, this was a really emotional and intimate look into a kind of infamous story that a lot of people already know. So we do follow the story of Circe, who is one of the first witches in Grecian mythology. So Circe, the main character, is outcast to an island for reasons I will not spoil. You have to read the book to find out. And while she's outcast on that island, we see her encounter people for the first time again. We also see her most famous tale unfold, which is the story of welcoming sailors onto her island. And because of her past betrayal, she feeds them food that poisons them and turns them into pigs, who she goes on to feed to the next lot of sailors who turn up at her island. This book venerates her voice and gives motivation to her actions, which seem extremely morbid, but the way Madeline Miller writes really gives us an intimate insight into the experience of Circe and the mind of Circe. This was a really emotional book. It was my first read of January, and it really set off my reading for this year to a good start. I would also recommend her other novel, The Song of Achilles, which made me cry. It is also a historical fiction that is based off true mythology. So if you like that genre and think that will be more interesting than just a normal historical fiction, definitely check out her writing. The next book I'm recommending is a suburban mystery as well as a historical fiction, and that is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I have already done an entire video discussing this book because after I read this, I was feeling a lot of feelings and needed to discuss. So if you want to check out that video, I will have it linked in the corner and in the description for you to go watch. But in short, this book is set in a very planned, perfect town in Cleveland. And we follow the story of Mia, who is a single mother and an artist, move into this town and witness it be torn apart by a custody battle between a biological mother and the adoptive parents of an Asian American baby. One of the reasons I love this book is because it really shows every side to the story, and so you aren't forced to believe one thing. Instead, you are forced to consider the conflict of the book yourself and come to your own conclusion. And in doing that, it really exposes how hypocritical being a judgmental person is. I think it is really eye-opening in that way. It also explores different ways of approaching life, whether it's by the rules or not. And again, it exposes how people harbor hatred because of distrust at not understanding the way other people might approach life and having a different idea of what is right or wrong to you. And so I think that is a really important thing to understand about humanity, and reading this really opened my eyes to that. I think it can do that for a lot of other readers too, so I highly recommend. Another reason why I love this book is how it explores motherhood and familial connection and love, which is where the main sources of conflict and tension arise from in the plot. So if you're looking for a book that is a deep dive into human nature, that will keep you at the edge of your seat and that will also be really thought-provoking and force you to feel conflicting things, then this is the perfect book for you. The last book I'd like to recommend is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This book is set in North Carolina in the 1960s, and we follow the very unique story of Kaya, who is known as the marsh girl in her hometown. Kaya is abandoned by her family in the swamp of her town when she's 7 years old, and so we follow her grow up to be isolated and very different to everyone else. We also see her interact with people for the first time, fall in love, be betrayed, all through her very unique lens. The author herself was an academic biologist, and so her description of human life, of marsh or swamp life, is very specific and very interesting, and it really adds an interesting layer to the way our main character sees humans and sees the way the world works. And punctuating this story of Kaya is the mystery of the murder of the town's sportsman Chase Andrews. So we see the police investigation and then the court trial unfold in between, realizing Kaya's history and past and identity. This book actually reminds me a little bit of Burial Rights in its themes and how it explores the mind of an insular and isolated woman. But that brings me to the end of my list of historical fiction book recommendations. I hope you found this helpful, and if you have any recommendations, please leave them down below. I will see you in the next video. Bye!